Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe, and hit the bell icon for latest updates. For many years, Dennis Collins was famous for being really good at buying and selling old cars. He could find amazing cars like rare Shelby Mustangs and fix up old Jeeps better than almost anyone. Dennis owned a shop called Collins Brothers Jeep in Wyoming, Texas. Car lovers came from far away to visit his shop. He was also on a TV show called Fast and Loud with his friend Richard Rawlings. People watched him turn old rusty cars into shiny expensive ones. Dennis wasn't just lucky though. He worked hard for many years to learn everything about cars. He knew exactly when to buy a car someone found in an old barn, how to make deals quickly, and when to say no and walk away. People who collected cars trusted him completely. Big car auction companies wanted to work with him. Fans thought Dennis never made mistakes with cars. His record of buying and selling cars looked almost perfect. But Dennis knew that buying old cars was risky business. In the car collecting world, one really bad purchase could wipe out all the money you made from several good purchases. Luckily, he had avoided that problem for most of his career working with cars. That changed when he got one phone call that changed everything in his life. Someone called him about a car that was so rare and special that Dennis had been dreaming about owning it for years. This wasn't just another car he could fix up and sell for profit. This was like winning a trophy. Getting this car could make him one of the most respected people in car history. The person described the car perfectly, sent amazing photos, and told a believable story about owning it. To Dennis, this looked like the best deal he would ever find in his whole life. But later, he would say that this deal turned into something completely different. A scary warning story. This happened because while chasing what seemed like the biggest win ever, he was about to make the one purchase that would give him nightmares forever. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. It was one of those quiet days at the shop where Dennis was doing boring paperwork and checking what cars he had. Someone he had bought cars from before called him. This person claimed he had found something incredible and amazing. The car they were talking about was extremely rare. This type of car only shows up at big car auctions maybe once every 10 years. If the story about the car was true, it would be one of the most valuable cars of its type in the entire world. Dennis listened very carefully as the seller told him about the car. It was a car that had been used in real races, only a few were ever made, and the record showed it was owned by someone famous in the car world. The seller said it had been sitting in a private garage for years where nobody could see it or touch it. The seller even tried to make Dennis feel emotional about it. He said he wanted the car to go to someone who would really love it, not just some rich person buying it as an investment. For Dennis, the combination of how rare the car was and the emotional story was like a drug. He had been in the car business long enough to know that chances like this didn't happen very often. If everything the seller said was true, the car was worth more than $1 million. Even after paying a lot of money for it, there would still be room to make profit. But beyond just making money, Dennis admitted later that he was excited by the thrill of finally getting this car. It was one he had been chasing through rumors and auction catalogs for many years. He was completely hooked on the idea. All that was left was to see the car with his own eyes. Dennis decided to fly out to see it by the end of that week. What he didn't know at the time was that this trip would start a deal that would test everything he had learned in his career and almost destroy his business. When Dennis got there, the car looked exactly like what he had seen in the photos, at least when he first looked at it. The car was sitting under a thick layer of dust in a garage that controlled the temperature. You could tell right away what kind of car it was, and it had a powerful presence that made you want to stare at it. The moment Dennis saw it, he felt that familiar excitement. This was definitely the car he wanted. But then the seller told him the price. The seller knew exactly how rare the car was, so he named a price that made even Dennis feel sick to his stomach. It was the kind of number that didn't just need confidence to pay. It needed complete belief that it was worth it. Paying that much money would mean putting a huge amount of his money into just one single car. Dennis did what he always does when looking at cars. He walked around it slowly, studying the body, looking into the engine area, and checking for any obvious problems. On the surface, the car looked good and strong. But there were no records of any recent work done on the engine, no detailed logs of restoration work, just a claim that it had been likely fixed up years ago and then stored away. The logical part of Dennis's brain told him to be careful. He knew how quickly lightly fixed up could turn into seriously damaged underneath. But the emotional part of him, the part that had been dreaming of owning this type of car, kept whispering, "You can make this work." In the end, he told the seller he needed one day to think about it. But as he got on the airplane to go home, Dennis already knew he was leaning toward buying the car. It was risky, but sometimes in the world of rare cars, the biggest wins come from making the boldest moves. At least, that's what he told himself to feel better about it. Back in Texas, Dennis didn't have much time to think about his decision. Word about the car had started to spread among serious car collectors. By the weekend, he was getting phone calls from friends warning him that other buyers were trying to get the car too. This was where his experience should have protected him from making a mistake. Normally, Dennis would order a complete inspection, bring in mechanics he trusted to check every single inch, and verify every detail of the car's history. But this time, he was running out of time. The seller hinted that if Dennis didn't agree to buy within 48 hours, he would sell it to another buyer. Someone willing to pay the full price without asking more questions. It was a calculated move to pressure Dennis, and he knew it. But he also knew that rare cars sometimes disappear into private collections for decades and never hit the market again. If he let this car go now, he might never see it again. Going against his better judgment, Dennis agreed to the seller's terms. No deep mechanical check, no long arguments about the price, just a handshake deal and a wire transfer. This made it one of the largest single purchases of his entire career. As the payment went through and transport was arranged, Dennis felt that familiar rush of victory. He had gotten the car he wanted. What he didn't feel was the creeping worry that would hit him soon enough. When the car finally arrived at his shop, the first cracks in his dream began to show. The delivery truck rolled into Colin's brother's Jeep on a bright Friday morning. Dennis, holding his coffee, was ready for the moment he'd been imagining for weeks, watching this rare beauty finally arrive on Texas soil. At first glance, it looked exactly like the prize he had paid so much money for. But as Dennis walked around the car, the details began giving him warnings. The paint looked shiny, but it had problems, tiny ripples in the bodywork that shouldn't be there on a car of this supposed quality. Looking closer revealed mismatched bolts in the engine area, suggesting parts had been replaced without caring about keeping it original. Underneath, there were patches of coating that looked way too fresh, possibly hiding rust repair work. Still, Dennis told himself it wasn't anything major. Every old car has a few weird things, and these could be fixed. But when he opened the driver's door, he smelled the musty smell of trapped water. Never a good sign with old cars. Lifting up the carpets, showed surface rust on the metal floor. Not completely terrible, but proof the car had been stored in damp conditions more than the seller had told him. Then came the paperwork, or rather the lack of it. The seller had promised lots of documentation, but what arrived was a thin folder with just a few faded service records and a handwritten note about restoration work done overseas. Dennis felt his stomach tighten into a knot. The dream car was finally here, yes, but it was already showing him that dreams can come with hidden problems. The plan had been simple and straightforward. Give the car a light mechanical tune-up, fix a few cosmetic flaws, and have it ready for auction within 3 months. But the deeper Dennis's team looked, the worse it got. The first big problem came when they drained the oil and found metallic pieces, a sign of serious engine damage. That meant a complete engine rebuild, adding tens of thousands of dollars to the budget before they'd even addressed the body problems. Then, while removing panels to repaint them, they discovered hidden accident damage. The car had been hit hard at some point in its life and poorly repaired. The frame alignment was off, which explained the uneven panel gaps Dennis had written off as quirkiness. Each fix led to finding another problem. Electrical problems plagued the dashboard. The fuel system was contaminated with bad gas and dirt. Even the transmission, which the seller had claimed was fresh and new, was slipping under load when they tested it. Dennis was no stranger to big restoration projects. But this wasn't a planned rebuild. It was a rescue mission to save a dying car. And every extra week in the shop was another week of lost market momentum. The car wasn't getting more valuable. It was sinking both financially and emotionally. In the collector car world, news travels fast, especially when a big-name buyer overpays for a questionable car. As months dragged on and the car failed to make its promised debut, people started talking. Friends in the industry started asking Dennis if the rumors were true, that he'd paid top dollar for a car with a shady past. A few people even admitted they'd heard about the accident damage long before Dennis bought the car. That really hurt his feelings. Potential clients, seeing Dennis struggle with this project, grew hesitant and worried. If Dennis can miss something that big, one dealer reportedly said, maybe he's not as perfect as we thought. For a man who'd built his career on his eye for detail, that kind of talk was more painful than the growing repair bill. Even his employees felt the tension in the shop. The car became a sore subject, a reminder of how one bad deal can ruin an entire season's momentum and profits. Every time Dennis walked past the car, he didn't see the prize he had chased for years. Instead, he saw a mistake that was draining time, money, and maybe worst of all, the trust people had in him. By the 1-year mark, Dennis had put more money into the car than he ever imagined. It was close to double his initial purchase price. The numbers stopped making sense months ago. Even with a perfect restoration, the market simply wouldn't support a sale price high enough to break even on his investment. For a man used to making strategic flips with built-in profit margins, this was completely unfamiliar territory. The math wasn't just bad. It was absolutely brutal and devastating. At one point, Dennis even considered cutting his losses by taking apart the car and selling the pieces. The drivetrain, rare trim pieces, and unique chassis components could bring in decent money individually if sold separately. But it would mean destroying a piece of automotive history he'd spent years chasing. It wasn't just about the money flow, either. Every hour his crew spent on this problem project was an hour not spent on another profitable build that could make money. Opportunity costs kept piling up like snow. Cars that could have turned a quick, healthy profit sat unused while this problem child ate up resources. To keep other operations running smoothly, Dennis quietly moved money from his personal savings, something he hadn't done in decades of business. The car wasn't just bleeding his business dry. It was testing the financial stability of his entire operation and threatening everything he had built. When Dennis finally stepped back to think about what happened, he realized the car itself wasn't the true mistake. It was his mindset going into the deal that was wrong. He had let his ego and emotions override the careful checking that had kept him successful for decades. For years, this particular type of car had been his white whale, the one that got away. He'd missed out on buying one in the 1990s and promised himself he wouldn't let another slip away. When this lead came in, it triggered that collector's instinct, the thrill of the chase, the rush of closing the deal before anyone else could get it. It blinded him to all the warning signs that were right in front of him. He skipped doing a full pre-purchase inspection. He didn't verify the restoration shop's history or reputation. He took the seller's word that the car was accident-free without digging deeper into registry archives and records. These were steps Dennis would lecture other people to follow when buying expensive cars. Yet in the heat of the moment, he ignored his own rules and advice. The car became a physical reminder that experience doesn't make you immune to making mistakes. In fact, sometimes having experience makes you overconfident and careless. Today, the car still sits in Dennis's possession, fully restored, mechanically perfect, and visually stunning. But it's not for sale. Not because it's worth keeping as an investment, but because it's worth remembering as a lesson. It serves as a warning story for every collector, dealer, and flipper who believes they can't be fooled or tricked. Dennis admits it still hurts to walk past it in the shop, but it also keeps him grounded and humble. Every deal since then has gone through the most rigorous checking process of his career, no matter how sure he feels about it. Financially, he's long since recovered from the loss. His reputation remains strong, actually helped by his honesty about the mistake. Fans and clients respect that he owned up to it rather than hiding it or making excuses. And in a strange way, the disaster actually strengthened his business. It forced him to slow down, reassess his methods, and protect against making the same kind of emotional purchase again. When people ask if he regrets buying the car, Dennis pauses and thinks. I regret the financial hit I took, sure. But without it, I might still think I'm invincible and can't make mistakes. And that's a far more expensive lesson to learn. The car taught him that no matter how experienced you are, you can still make costly mistakes if you let emotions take over. It reminded him that following proper procedures isn't just for beginners, it's for everyone, especially when dealing with expensive purchases. Dennis learned that sometimes the most expensive lessons are also the most valuable ones. The car sitting in his shop isn't just a restored classic, it's a daily reminder to stay humble, follow the rules, and never let excitement override careful judgment. In the end, Dennis Collins remained successful. But he became wiser and more careful because of one very expensive mistake that taught him more than any profitable deal ever could.